You are standing in a stadium you have never been to, in a country you have never visited, screaming for a team made up of players you have never met. Your heart is pounding. Your hands are shaking. And somewhere deep in your chest, you feel like you personally just won something. You didn't score a goal. You didn't train for years. You didn't even leave your couch. So why does it feel like your victory? The real answer is far stranger than loyalty or luck. Since 1930, something strange keeps happening at the World Cup. A pattern, one that has nothing to do with talent, budgets, or even the best players on the field. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's go back to the very beginning. In 1930, the first World Cup was held in Uruguay. Nobody expected much. It was a small tournament, 13 teams. Most of Europe didn't even bother making the trip by boat. But Uruguay won, on home soil, in front of a home crowd. Coincidence? Maybe. For years later, Italy hosted the tournament. Italy won, home soil again. In 1966, England hosted the World Cup for the first time. England won, their only title in history to this day. Do you see it yet? The host nation has won the World Cup 6 times. 6 out of 22 tournaments ever played. That is a staggering number when you consider that dozens of countries compete for that trophy, and yet the nation standing on its own ground keeps ending up on top far more often than pure chance would allow. This is not superstition. Researchers have been studying this exact phenomenon for decades, and it has a name. It's called home advantage, and sports scientist Richard Pollard spent years analyzing decades of match data to measure exactly how much a crowd, a stadium, and familiar ground shifts the outcome of a game. His research found that home teams across nearly every sport win significantly more often than visiting teams, even when the talent on paper is roughly equal. Something about being watched by your own people, standing on your own grass, changes the way the human body performs under pressure. But here's where it gets stranger. Because the advantage isn't just physical, it's psychological. And it isn't only happening to the players on the field. It's happening to you, the person watching from your living room, thousands of miles away from any stadium at all. In the 1970s, psychologist Robert Cialdini ran an experiment that changed how scientists understood fan behavior forever. He and his team studied university students after football games and noticed something curious. When their team won, students were far more likely to wear team merchandise the next day and use the word "we" when talking about the victory. We won. But when their team lost, suddenly the language shifted. They lost. Not we. They. Cialdini called this basking in reflected glory. Your brain does not clearly separate your own identity from the identity of a group you feel connected to. When that group succeeds, some part of your brain genuinely registers it as your own success. This is not a metaphor. It is measurable. It is why a stranger will hug you in the street after a goal. It is why grown adults cry over a game they had absolutely no control over. Now stretch that idea back tens of thousands of years, because this feeling did not start with football. For most of human history, survival depended entirely on group cohesion. A human alone in the wilderness rarely lasted long. A human inside a tribe had protection, shared food, and shared defense against threats. Because of this, evolution shaped your brain to prioritize group identity as if it were a matter of life and death. Sociologist Emile Durkheim described a related phenomenon over a century ago, calling it collective effervescence, the powerful emotional energy that surges through a crowd of people who feel unified around shared symbol or shared moment. A flag, a chant, a goal. This is why the World Cup does not feel like entertainment. It feels like tribal survival, replayed on a global stage every 4 years. So back to that pattern. Host nations winning more often than statistics should allow isn't just about referees or travel fatigue for visiting teams, though both play a role. It's about what happens inside tens of thousands of nervous systems at once. When a stadium full of people collectively believe, collectively roar, collectively hold their breath at the same second, something measurable happens to the players on that field. Cortisol levels shift. Confidence shifts. The crowd becomes, in a very real physiological sense, an extra player on the pitch. Here is the twist that changes everything, though. If home advantage were the entire explanation, every host nation would win. They don't. Brazil hosted in 2014 and suffered one of the most infamous losses in tournament history. South Africa hosted in 2010 and didn't even make it past the group stage. The pattern is real, but it isn't a guarantee. It's a tilt, not a certainty. And that tilt reveals something even more important than who lifts the trophy. It reveals that the outcome of a nation's biggest sporting moment has never purely been about which players are the most skilled. It has always been about belief, pressure, identity, and the invisible force of millions of people believing at the exact same time. Historian and social scientist Eric Hobsbawm once wrote about how modern nations found new symbols to replace older tribal ones once empires and traditional group structures dissolved. Sport became one of the most powerful of those symbols, a socially approved battlefield where entire nations could feel like one single organism again, if only for 90 minutes. Which brings you back to that moment in the stadium, or on your couch, or in a crowded bar with strangers who suddenly feel like family. You're not simply watching a game. You are participating in one of the oldest instincts your species has ever carried, the instinct to belong to something larger than yourself, and to feel its victories and defeats as your own. Every scream in that stadium, every held breath before a penalty kick, every stranger hugging another stranger after a goal is not really about the ball at all. It is about a very old, very human need to disappear into a crowd of we, instead of standing alone as I. So when the next World Cup begins, and you feel that familiar pull in your chest as the anthem plays, remember this. You're not just hoping a team wins. You are doing something your ancestors have done around fires, on battlefields, and inside tribal circles for tens of thousands of years. You are choosing, for just a little while, to stop being one person and to become part of something enormous instead. And that stranger standing next to you, screaming the same words at the same second? For 90 minutes, you were never really strangers at all.